And today's sponsor is Reconciled. Reconcile invoices your clients, pays your bills, and delivers clear and accurate financial reports every month automatically. Ready to streamline your financials and prepare your business for the next big step? Visit reconcile.com today.
Hello, and welcome to the How to Exit podcast, where we introduce you to a world of small to medium business acquisitions and mergers. We interview business owners, industry leaders, authors, mentors, and other influencers with the sole intent to share with you what it looks like to buy or sell a business. Let's get rolling.
And now a moment for our sponsors. I want to highly recommend you get Acquisition Aficionado magazine. Every month, Acquisition Aficionado magazine brings you tactics for business buying and selling you won't find anywhere else. Learn firsthand from industry leaders who share their success stories, featuring in-depth interviews and stories from leading figures in the business acquisition industry. This multi-platform mobile magazine speaks to acquisition entrepreneurs wherever they are in the journey. And I want you to visit acquisitionaficionado.com today. Hello and welcome to the How to Exit podcast. Today I'm here with Chelsea Mandel. She is the founder of Ascension Advisory, and we're going to talk about how real estate can play a role in the mergers and acquisition games, more specifically sale-leasebacks. Thank you for being on the show today.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
I always start off with kind of the origin story. Give us a little bit of your life history. My joke has always been, and I'm sure the listeners are finally getting sick of this thing, is you were born and then you ended up on a show about mergers and acquisition. Can you fill out the gap in between? How did you start developing yourself into this niche?
Yeah. So I actually started in more traditional real estate private equity. So I was an acquisitions analyst at Starwood Capital Group, mostly buying at the time. It was a lot of malls, distressed malls with value add opportunities and multifamily deals. And so that's kind of my first entrance into real estate. It was really just pure play real estate, no credit angle to it. And then a couple of years in there, I was recruited to actually join a private equity firm in New York City called New Mountain Capital. And so this was a credit private equity firm. They had a private equity strategy, a credit strategy, a hedge fund at the time. And they were looking to launch a sale-leaseback and net lease platform, really getting into the real estate strategy through the broader kind of credit focus of sale-leasebacks. And so I was the first employee hired there. I was working for the portfolio manager. Super exciting. I was really young. I was like 23 at the time. They were launching a new fund, but it was a new fund in that new strategy, but with the backing of this broader, mature, really stable private equity firm with a great reputation. And it was exciting to me because you kind of had the best of both worlds. It was a startup entrepreneurial environment in terms of that fund, but mature enough that you didn't have a lot of the downside risks that you have as an actual startup company. So I joined that firm. I joined the fund. We raised about $500 million in capital for a first-time fund, which was pretty awesome. And we just started buying deals, all sale-leasebacks. I would say it was mostly industrial, mostly with other middle market private equity firms. So I was really getting used to and understanding and being able to underwrite like sponsored levered credits, middle market companies. These weren't like publicly rated public companies. These were businesses that you really had to understand and kind of get your hands dirty to understand a balance sheet and the investment thesis, et cetera. And so I was there for a couple years, again, focus on purely sale-leasebacks, to the point where I said, this is really exciting, but I actually want to be on the other side of this opportunity. And so that's when I joined an advisory firm, a real estate brokerage firm that was focused on sale-leasebacks. That firm was called Stream Capital Partners. I was there for a couple years. This was my first opportunity as a broker, and nobody really understood why I was going from being on the investment side to brokerage, but it was exciting for me. The entrepreneurial angle was there. You really have like an unlimited, uncapped upside, and that was exciting. And so I joined that firm. I opened up a New York office and I was there for about 3 years. I did about $1 billion in sale-leasebacks. And then after that, kind of had the same entrepreneurial itch and just wanted to go at it, really double down on myself and on the reputation that I built in the sale-leaseback space. And I left that firm and I started Ascension a couple months later. And so we're about a year and a half in and focused similarly on corporate real estate and sale-leasebacks in pretty much the middle market and lower middle market space. So super abbreviated, but that's high level.
Oh, cool. Real quick before we get too far into this, explain what a sales-leaseback is for anybody that may not know.
Yeah, great place to start. So basically a sale-leaseback is when a business or a private equity owner or sponsor of a business sells its company owned real estate that we consider to be mission critical to the operations. And in exchange for getting that large cash proceeds up front, they enter into a long term lease. And so you're basically going from being an owner to being a tenant, and you retain all the operational flexibility and control of that property and of your location through that lease agreement. But the benefit is that typically you have a higher and better use for your capital than being tied up in property. And most of the time, you're executing this transaction at a multiple where the valuation or the implied multiple is much higher than the EBITDA multiple of the business. So you're basically selling a non core asset at a higher multiple than where the broader business would trade, which results in the business basically seeing some equity value creation.
Yeah, I've noticed that you can actually get a little bit of a premium through a sales leaseback as opposed to just selling it on the open market, especially if it's on a high revenue business. If your business is making good money, that's more of a determining factor than necessarily what are the comps in the neighborhood, right?
Totally.
They come into play, don't get me wrong, but I just noticed that we're getting a little bit better price on those.
Definitely. I would say the sale lease back, it's two components. It's credit and it's real estate. The real estate really being secondary to the credit. So
Mhm.
from an underwriting standpoint and from a methodology standpoint, we look at valuation by really looking at three factors. So the first and most important being the credit of that operating business. So we're understanding the financials, the sponsorship, the balance sheet, leverage profile, et cetera. And then second, most important, even before the real estate, is why is this property mission critical to the operations of the company? So is the tenant super sticky? Can they not reproduce this location from a replacement cost standpoint? So they have tons of equipment here? Are they proximate to suppliers and customers? All these reasons that make this property really important to the business, that creates value over and above what the actual building is worth. And so, yeah, when you look at the sale leaseback value compared to the just broad real estate market fair value, typically it's significantly higher, and that spread could be really meaningful, especially when we talk about potential acquirers of these businesses.
So I'm gonna have you potentially correct one of the myths I might be portraying out there. I've
Sure.
been telling people come to me and they ask about these and I refer off. One of the things I do is I kind of have this little campaign. I know a guy or I know a gal. And it's like if you get stuck in an M&A deal, you can't find the financing or you're stuck in it and you need an advisor. If you're willing and able to pay for that help, don't be stuck. Reach out to me. I've interviewed over 150 people. I probably know somebody. I know a guy or a gal that can help you out. And so I do get a lot of people asking for funding, and I ask if the first thing I always ask if they have real estate.
Yeah.
And depending on the business, the only time I won't refer somebody over to a company like yours is if that real estate is absolutely critical to the business. Like one of the guys bought a golf course. I was like, I don't know if I would sell and lease back my golf course because the real estate is the business,
Yeah.
right?
I would disagree. I would say those are the best sale leaseback candidates because what you're saying to me, if that building is absolutely critical to the business, is you're saying you're never going to leave. So a 20-year lease is obviously long, but you're basically saying you can't ever leave. You really have no option. So if I'm an investor of sale leasebacks, I'm willing to pay more for that building than what I know the building is worth because I feel so confident in the certainty of that long-term lease and you renewing that lease forever because what alternative do you have if it's so important to the business? So from a business owner standpoint, typically they can get the same level of control and operational flexibility through a long-term lease than they can with ownership, and they're doing it at, again, accretive multiples, creating substantially more value than what the property is actually worth that they could then invest back into the business with which actually carries like an ROI associated with it. So I think as long as you're structuring the lease right through an advisor, you're setting up a long-term lease, it's an absolute triple net lease, so it basically looks and feels just like ownership does. I would say those are the best candidates when the property is so critical to the business.
Okay. So what if like a lot of the people that are listening to the show, they're acquisition entrepreneurs. A lot of them aren't operators coming from one industry looking to buy their business and stick with it for 30 years. They're
Yeah.
true acquisition entrepreneurs. They're going to buy something, improve it for 3 to 5 years, maybe add things to it, bolt it on. And then most of the guys are operating at that small, medium business, the SBA loan range, 5 million. Maybe for this show, people go up to 10. They're playing right under the radar of private equity. So depending on
Yeah.
the industry, that radar goes as low as 10 million in some industries, as low as 25, 30 million, and some as high as 50 million in others before private equity will even touch it. So these guys their goal is to buy it below the radar of private equity, clean it up, do what they need to do, and sell it to private equity because it sells at a higher multiple. In
Yeah.
that case, when you know you're going to sell the business in, say, 5 years, is a sales leaseback going to hurt the sellability of the business, or is it going to hurt the ability for you to help get the loan if the person just knows? Because the new buyer has to live to that lease too. So I'm just
Right.
curious, how does that impact the long-term game of an acquisition entrepreneur, somebody who's going to not flip businesses, but go in and do what their sweet spot is, right? Which is improve revenue to a certain point and then sell for a profit.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I mean, that's probably the most important consideration when we're negotiating these lease agreements
Mhm.
is what is change of control, assignment, what does that look like? And I would say the opposite is true. Actually, selling the real estate through a sale lease back before you sell the business is typically the better move, not only because you're bifurcating the cash flows into EBITDA and rent, again, at a higher multiple for that rent side of the equation, but because most sponsors, most private equity firms don't want to own real estate or they can't own real estate. A lot of them have a mandate that they can own property, or owning the property and paying for the real estate through that transaction doesn't get them to the return threshold that they need for the broader M&A deal. And so a lot of the time we're actually working with either business owners or sponsors right before they exit, taking care of the real estate for them in a sale lease back so that when they sell the business, they're selling it clean with a long-term lease attached to it. Obviously, the considerations that we have to take into account are making sure that we're structuring that lease to optimize the exit optionality for the next buyer. So we're setting rents at market, escalators at market. We're not trying to juice proceeds by pushing rents above market because then buyers are just going to ding your EBITDA. But we're also negotiating operational flexibility for the business. We're thinking about change of control provisions, making sure that they can sell the business without needing landlord consent, and putting in flexible language as it relates to expansions, alterations, other things that affect the operations of the company.
Okay. And then I'm thinking, like, what is the other big concern is on these sales lease back is rental increases? Is it done off a percentage above of inflation? I know they're done and they're contracted in. How do they can that be structured in any such way, or is there common ways that the lease is managed as far as the amount?
Yeah. So typically, if this were like a year and a half ago, I would say market standard is 2% annual fixed escalators. Now,
Hmm.
honestly, just given inflation and broader kind of macro volatility, that's really moved to, I would say, 2.5 to even 3% in some markets.
Hmm.
Obviously, in better markets, if you're in Los Angeles, like it could be more like 4.5%. So it's not fair to say there's one number for the whole world, but really it is, I would say, across the US, you're probably at somewhere between 2 to 3%. You can do deals where there's like an inflation linked escalator where it's some percentage of CPI. But typically, if you do that, there's a cap and a floor. So a lot of the European sale leasebacks that we do are
Hmm.
basically CPI for that country escalators with a cap of say 1% or a floor of say 1% and a cap of like 4%. So it kind of ranges depending on the country, but I would say in the US, you're typically 2 to 3% fixed.
So that's a great segue to another question. Where can you do these deals? Because we do have listeners, and I'm connected to a pretty big network in Europe, and I've got a lot of people I know in Canada, Australia. So basically, if I picked a top five or four or five, it would be U.S., then Europe, and then Canada probably, and then Australia.
Got it.
And
Yeah. So in terms of sale leasebacks, I would say US, Canada, Mexico. So really across North America and then
mhm,
UK and Europe. I know
okay.
there is a sale leaseback market in Australia. I think it's just something that we haven't tapped into yet. But yeah, I would say North America and Europe, UK for us.
Okay. I was just curious because, like, we're gonna have as soon as I post this out there, I'll have people from different groups be like, "Hey, can they do that in Europe?" And I always thought about it as there's this thing we call the deal pie or the structuring of how we're going to pay for the deal. I've always thought it about it on the buy side, right? Like, okay, I've got X number of dollars down. I've convinced the owner that I can give him a bigger check within the first 90 days of operation. Then now I've got the sales lease back. I can secure the property, sales lease back it, pay him down or pay him off depending on the sales lease back. I have people that are trying to do back to back closes, like basically close the sales lease back at the same day they close the business. It's possible. There's just a little extra legwork to do, right?
That's about half of our business, honestly. About
Yeah.
50% of our volume is simultaneous sale leasebacks with M&A transactions. It's definitely become more popular in like the last year or two, where acquisition financing on the traditional debt markets has become more challenging.
Mhm.
But when we talk to groups and for the first time they've heard of it and they've never heard of it before, it's like they can't believe that's like even a possibility. We've done so many deals in this space where I think until the closing day, still like our clients didn't trust that this was going to happen. And then once we get one in with that group, it's like they just want to continue buying and showing us opportunities to see if that could be a fit for the sale leaseback to be acquisition financing.
Awesome. So, what are the criteria? Like, what should somebody expect? I heard you say the viability of the business, the balance sheet and stuff. So I'm assuming clean financials. A lot of these small businesses, they just don't have clean financial. If somebody comes to you and they're bringing a deal, what is, because I've tried, for full disclosure, everybody, you and I have been chatting for a while and I've been putting referrals over to you for a little bit. And a couple of them just, they didn't match because they were weird, like 3 or 4 tenants already in the building and that type of stuff.
Yeah. So in terms of criteria, like for that one specifically, that was a multi-tenant deal. So
Mhm,
really that's a good segue into the criteria, which is single tenant. That has to be the first criteria because the strategy is really, again, a credit strategy. So if you're
mhm.
looking at 5 or 6 tenants for the sale leaseback investor, they don't want to be underwriting 5 or 6 credits and balance sheets and financial statements. They want one tenant, again, who the property is mission critical to those operations. So if you have 5 tenants, you can't really say that, or it's harder to make that work because that has to be true across 5 different situations. So we say single tenant in terms of the nature of the building, the occupancy, freestanding. We can do condo deals, but they're just more challenging and they come with a higher cost of capital. And that's really it from like the standpoint of the physical real estate. In terms of the asset class, again, it's any asset class so long as this is operationally critical to the business. So it could be restaurants, healthcare facilities, medical offices, industrial facilities, manufacturing, distribution centers, warehouses, anything where the business operates there. And it would be difficult for them to just pick up and leave, or interruptive to them if they just had to close that down. So that's really a good way to think about the actual real estate or the asset type. In terms of the non real estate kind of requirements or criteria, yes, we need to look at financials of the operating company. No, they don't need to be audited or even like management or CPA reviewed. A lot of the time, we're getting QuickBooks files from these smaller business owners, and that's totally fine. There will be more questions, but we can use QuickBooks, Excel file, PDF file, financial statements. They don't have to be anything super fancy. That's really it on the financial side. So I would say about 3 years of whatever those financials look like, P&Ls, balance sheets, etc. And then for a simultaneous M&A deal, we want to see what the pro forma cap stack looks like, pro forma balance sheet, what the sources and uses are for the deal. And that doesn't mean that A is good and B is bad. You could be putting in no equity and we could still find a way forward to make the sale leaseback happen. We just need to understand what that all looks like, what the cap stack looks like, and what the sale leaseback is going to be vis-a-vis the broader cap stack. So that's really it on the operation side. And on the real estate side, the last piece is really, if this is a piece of real estate that's part of a broader footprint, we also want to understand like the site level contribution. So if this is something like car wash, we want to understand the 4 wall criteria or metrics as well. So we'll look at the unit level revenues, EBITDA, to make sure that from a health ratio standpoint, so rent to sales, and from a coverage standpoint, EBITDA to rent, we also feel good about that specific location, not just the broader credit of the consolidated platform.
So what a lot of people don't understand is some of the big guys have been doing this for a long time. CVS pharmacies were all built off of this, right? Almost
Yeah.
every single CVS pharmacy happens where they'll pick a location, they'll buy the location, and this is going back to my MBA days. So this is my knowledge is probably based around 2007. I may be doing something different now.
Okay.
So if I'm doing something different, they're doing something different now, and I'm misleading anybody, just correct me if you know the difference. But based off of what I remember, they bought the land, they built the CVS, and they would sell leaseback it to recapitalize, basically get their capital, build the next one. And a lot of places like that, I know, like Quick Trips are fairly common in. They're based out of Oklahoma. They're common in Oklahoma and Texas. They're big gas stations. They did that. I know I have friends who were private lenders to me in the real estate space that would do a sales leaseback. They would be the buyer of a Quick Trip, or they'd build it for them. Basically, the Quick Trip
Yeah,
would go
build
to
to
them.
suit financing is really more
Yeah.
common with the CVS space. So yeah, it's either sale leasebacks or build to suits. But what they figured out is owning real estate is a bad use of capital when you can invest your capital at higher ROIs into the operating company. And that's why they do this. You're not in the landlord game. You're not a
Yeah.
real estate investor. So let the landlords be the real estate investors and you do what you're best at.
Yeah. So like QuitTrip was doing the thing where like if you had, I think it was like $3.5 million, you'd buy the site, build it out, and they would just built it.
They would just sign a lease.
Yeah, yeah. So this has been done on the big scale. I mean, that's an indicator. I always look for things. What are the private equity guys doing? What are the big guys doing that we should take a look at and figure out if we can make that happen down at our level? Because for two reasons. One is we're going to sell to them at some point. That's the end
Right.
game, right? None of us are going to be in business forever. One of the reasons we're trying to get the word out about buying businesses and stuff like that, because there's just too few of businesses that have succession plans and know what happens next. A lot of businesses out there, we're going to run into a big problem in the economy because businesses are sitting out there and we've got operators that are 60, 70 years old and they don't have a succession plan. We don't, as an acquisition entrepreneur, you're not that person. You're really looking at what's the long-term play here. I have a holding company of web stuff and stuff like that. I'll hold it until I get old or bored. And at some point, like, but I know there's an exit there. So I got to run it that way. So aside of that, the sales leaseback is one of the things that has been brought down from the big guys. Been doing it for a long time, right? And then I didn't even know anything about it until I got into this space and somebody mentioned, hey, does anybody know about a sales leaseback? I was like, what is that? And when they said it, it's like, okay, I can make that happen. I know people that or could have connections to the family offices and REITs and stuff that buy these real estate. So I started reaching around trying to build a little bit of my team so I could help facilitate these for people who needed them. And it went okay. And then I kind of laid off of it because they were harder to close than what I would kind of initially expected, and I got distracted. And then I had a couple people reach out to me again when I started this I Know a Guy. That's how I found you. But other than that, it was not like a choice to go to you or somebody else because there was anything wrong there. It's just this is all you do, right?
It's
And
a
when I,
very, very niche space. You
it
really
is.
need to have an expert advisor, not only in real estate, but in sale leasebacks because of everything you said. Most of the groups we're looking at these deals with or that we're currently working on, they're looking to exit to private equity. They're looking to exit to somebody. So we
Right.
can't be in a situation where we structure a deal and we screw up your exit because you have to get landlord consent to sell your company or something else that's just crazy and makes no sense, but someone structured it that way who didn't have that sale leaseback expertise to know that your exit flexibility and optionality is really the most important thing to this business. We've taken over so many deals from groups that were going elsewhere to even like the big one-stop shop real estate brokerage firms where they do a little bit of this, a little bit of that, a little bit of sale leasebacks, but not really, or with big public credit companies, not with middle market credit companies, not with private equity owned companies, not with SMBs that are going to sell to private equity. So really understanding the exit optionality for these businesses and structuring those leases, which are long term. They're going to have to live with these for 15, 20 years. That's probably the most important thing that we do in these deals. So you really need to have an expert advisor who's in this space, in this lane, in this very small niche, because that's all we do. And thankfully, and I'm knocking on wood as we say this, but we haven't gotten anything wrong where a deal has come back to bite us years later because we structured a bad lease.
So you opened my eyes to something because I've run into some I call them operators, business owners. Business owner to me is somebody who, or a good business owner to me is somebody who's ready to exit. There's somebody else running it. They've already done all everything. It's prepared to go. But an operator is somebody, he's still in the mix of things. And one of the things and a lot of times they're wearing 4 or 5 hats. They don't have the money to bring in the right team to make it a business owner situation where he's not just an operator. And I think that opened my eyes. What you're saying right now is this is a good exit strategy too. So if you're a business operator, you own a heat and air company or something out there, you've got a big manufacturing company, you're there every day. You need to replace your management. You need to bring people in. Like you're running good, you got good profit margins, but not enough to hire a team of 3 or 4. This is a great opportunity. Do a sales leaseback. Now you got operating cash. Bring in that team, bring in an advisor to help you build that team and prepare it to exit. I mean, I know too many situations over the last 2 or 3 years where like, look, you're just not really ready to sell unless you can find somebody who wants to be in this job every single day. You've got to sell to an operator. So if you're an operator in a business, one of the things you handcuff yourself to is you're either going to be stuck there for an earn out afterwards while there's a huge transition, or you're going to have to find an operator that wants to buy it, right? Somebody that can just step in and do your daily task. And when you ask them, like, why don't you spend a year or so, bring in a team? And if you're operating, a lot of the manufacturing companies, they're operating at a 5% or less profit margin. It's lean. or maybe a little higher than that. But you start talking about it, I need to bring in a CEO and a top sales guy and an accountant because I do all the sales, all the leadership, and I do the books half the time. You start replacing 3 salaries, and all of a sudden that 5 or 8% profit margin is tough. I didn't think about it until you just said that. I think this is a great opportunity. Like, look, you're sitting on $1.5 million or $2 million or $3 million worth of real estate, maybe more, depending on if you're in LA, that's the corner. But you're sitting on enough capital in that real estate potentially to take some skin off the table, maybe even like fund your retirement a little bit and still have enough money to bring in that operator, bring in that staff, bring in a company that's an exit advisor to help you prepare that, get it ready. And then now you've maximized, you got a little bit of money for now, and then you maximize your exit and you're selling something people really want.
Yeah,
Uh,
I mean, there's a ton of great uses, I think, for sale leaseback proceeds. I think the thing is, people just don't think of this as in the mainstream or in the S&B world. Like, they don't think of it as an obvious tool. They think of it still with like the view from like decades ago that like, oh, this is only for distressed businesses that need to like tap into liquidity. No, if it's you need to buy equipment, use a sale leaseback proceeds to go fund equipment. That's ROI generating. Get another production line in there. Use it to professionalize your management team so you can prepare the business for an exit. Use it to retire your other generation above you of parents that want to get out of the business, take some chips off the table. There's all these different reasons. It's really just an inflow of cash for whatever you need or want the cash to be used for. There's nothing in our agreements that says you have to put the cash into the business or use it to pay down debt or do something else. This is really, if you're the business owner and the real estate owner, it's cash that you can use the cash for whatever you want.
yeah, there's a society based mindset that renters or low income renters are or losers, right? It comes from the residential side of it. So everybody's like, "Well, I got to own my building, right? It's more business. It's smarter for me to own the business and I'm not paying rent." And I was like, "No, rent's actually a deductible expense, right? Like you can write that off as opposed to, I guess there's depreciation and other stuff on the real estate, but there's some real advantages of not owning."
Totally. And a lot of the time too, like the sale leaseback candidates, the real estate that we're doing these transactions around, they're pretty tertiary located. They're really not appreciating the way if you took your sale leaseback real estate, did a sale leaseback, took the cash and bought sick home in Malibu, sure, yeah, like poo poo the renters and hurrah the homeowners, but your asset's going to appreciate. But your manufacturing facility in the middle of nowhere, Iowa, probably is not going to appreciate. So you're better off taking that rent expense tax deduction and hanging on to your property thinking it's going to sell for multiples more than you paid for it now in a couple of years because it's probably not.
Right. So let's walk through the process. What does somebody need to have ready to bring to you? What do you? I bring somebody to you and say, "Hey, I've got a guy over here. He's going to do a sales lease back. He's about to exit. He owns a real estate, and he was considering or renting it. Like a lot of these guys, they consider renting the property to the
Yeah.
person who is buying the business
Yeah.
themselves. And while that works to some extent, I think it's better to do what you're doing there, and you actually get a lump sum of cash, and you're no longer, most of these business owners are not property managers,
Yeah,
right?
we've
They
had some really funny stories actually about that situation that you're
Yeah.
describing being a really bad outcome for the business. Because if you're, say, you're a food manufacturer, just for an
Mhm.
example, right? And you've built this business and family owned for generations, you then sell your business, but you retain the real estate, structure a lease with the new private equity acquirer of your business, Chelsea's Salsa, whatever it is. Now Chelsea still owns your building. Chelsea thinks she's still in the business, even though Chelsea is out of the business. Now I'm walking around the property thinking I'm still involved. And it's just, it's awkward. One, we've had this situation where we've had to like tell the landlord, like, this is an absolutely triple net lease. You're not in the business anymore. You have to just like kind of back off a bit because they kind of still think that they're involved, even though they've sold the company. Retaining that real estate makes them feel like they're still up in your business. And it's been a situation where we've gotten involved, I think, 2 times where we've had to remove that landlord, help them actually sell the property
Yeah.
to a professional real estate investor because it wasn't working out with the new owners of the operating business. Because you're a lot of these owners also like they do want a clean exit. They want to wash their hands of everything and not have to deal with the real estate or the business going forward. A lot of the time it's actually from the acquirers. They think, oh, I can't own the real estate, so I need the business owner or the seller to hold on to the property because they don't know about a sale leaseback. They don't know that they could bring in somebody else to buy the property. They just know that they can't own it. So that's where we're here to come in and say, look, your seller doesn't want to own the property either. Let us bring in a total third-party professional real estate investor. This is what they do for a living. They're going to own your building. It's going to be absolutely triple net. You're going to make any spread also if there's spread between the seller's pricing expectations on the building and what we can generate in a sale leaseback. And neither of you have to worry about the real estate going forward.
And today's sponsor is Reconciled. Are you an entrepreneur or business owner thinking about your exit strategy? Or maybe you've just landed a business through acquisition and the books just aren't the way you need them to be. Let me tell you about Reconciled, your dedicated partner for industry-leading virtual bookkeeping and accounting services. Reconciled pairs you with skilled professionals who empower you to grow your business and prepare for success, whether that's your exit or taking that new acquisition to top performance. Imagine having high-level financial management without expanding your team. From bookkeeping to CFO services, tax advisory, and even fully outsourced accounting, Reconciled has got you covered. They help you make the best business decisions, keeping your end goal in mind. And the best part? Reconciled understands acquisitions, as they have acquired 3 accounting firms in the past 3 years, and their founder, Michael Lee, mentors others in searching for acquisition, raising capital, or trying to aggressively scale. Reconcile invoices your clients, pays your bills, and delivers clear and accurate financial reports every month automatically. Ready to streamline your financials and prepare your business for the next big step? Visit reconcile.com today and let them get your books in order. Reconciled, making bookkeeping a breeze. That's reconciled.com. Yeah, I've got one from I don't remember if this is from back when I was playing on Clubhouse or if it was from, I host twice a month. I host a meetup for acquisition entrepreneurs where we get in and the goal is to introduce ourselves to each other and kind of say where we're at in the game. And if we're stuck anywhere, like we help each other for about an hour and a half move, like find resources, make referrals, move your game
Yeah.
forward. I think it was on Clubhouse. We were chatting about sales-leasebacks, and one of the guys, oh, that's a horrible idea. I was like, what is that? From the buyer's perspective, this guy bought a business. They repaired semis of all weird things. The funny thing is, me and a business partner looked at something similar. So I was really interested in his story. But he bought it and he rented the land back and the facility back from the owner because the owner didn't want to sell him the real estate. And he kind of didn't want to be in the real estate game anyway. So he did a triple net lease, and which was set up wrong from what I understand, because the owner selling the business was not a real estate person either. So the lease was kind of funky. But he needed to expand. He needed new bays. This thing was sitting on 5.5 acres, and a lot of it was just like gravel yard.
Yeah.
Semis would go park out in this, maybe more, like 5.5 acres, but it was big. It was a big yard. So they'd park semis out, and then they would bring them in to work on it. And he wanted to build 2 more bays on the building, and the previous owner's like, well, you're not ready to expand yet. Well, I'm not going to allow you to build you're making a bad business decision. He was in the middle of this business, like this guy's business, and saying, well, you can't, there's not enough business around town to have a 2 base. He brought his 40 years of bias into what the market used to be to the game and was stopping this guy from expanding what he'd bought as a business because he didn't think it was a great idea. And that happens, right? If you're a buyer of the business and the business you're buying, the seller wants to be your landlord, think about that stuff. Is he going to want to play an active role in there when it comes time that you need to expand the building or add
Yeah.
another little office off to the side or do something on the land that you're renting? It's important you have to be able to have that ability to expand.
Yeah, the other thing, like a pretty relevant topic to what you're saying now, is we're actually working on a deal where a business owner, a business is owned by a private equity firm. The private equity firm acquired the business from, a founder. Now the founder, again, like you're saying, wanted to hold on to the real estate. So they structured a lease with the
Hmm.
operating company. It's a market lease. It's fine. So we looked at it and we said, okay, yeah, that lease is fine. We tried to push them to do a sale leaseback to bring in a professional investor. We'd pay them the same amount that the seller wanted. They
Hmm.
just didn't want to. They thought it'd be easier to just structure a lease with the seller. Now, this is a couple of years ago. Now, today, they've come to us and they said, we need to expand. We don't want to fund it. The landlord doesn't want to fund it. So now we're coming back to, it's a sizable industrial property. And they said, can we structure a transaction where you bring in a sale leaseback investor to buy the building and then also pre-commit to fund our expansion, which is about the same amount as what the building is worth. So say it's a $10 million sale leaseback, another $10 million for the expansion. That's a $20 million deal. This landlord, he doesn't want to fund your $10 million expansion, even if he's making a rate of return on it. He also probably doesn't have the $10 million to fund. He's not a professional investor. He sold his business. He's a great business owner, clearly, but he's not in the investment game of funding additional kind of deals and expansions as they come up. So now we're working on a deal where it's kind of like this tri-party arrangement where we're bringing in a new sale-leaseback investor to buy the existing building from the landlord, structure a new lease with the operating company to really maximize it to justify the sale-leaseback investor's price that they're paying. And they're committing to fund it 100% of the total cost, and then structuring in a lease amendment to increase the rent for that yield on cost based on the total cost. They could have done this so much easier if we just did a sale leaseback initially and then went to that investor and said, hey, we need to fund $10 million expansion. Okay, we'll do it at an 8% cap rate. We'll amend their lease and we'll increase the rent. Because that's what they do as being a professional investor. They're always looking to fund these expansions. It also helps them as the credit of the actual operating business grows because now they have more capacity on site, et cetera. So very relevant.
Yeah, and the other one I heard was, and this is relevant to this too, business buyer, acquisition entrepreneur buys a business years ago. He bought it. The seller leased the land to him. Things had happened. I don't know what happened. The conversation, it sounds like the seller of the business really thought this was a safe pair of hands. This guy was going to be the operator for 20 or 30 years. He got an offer he couldn't refuse by private equity. It was a weird deal where private equity was funding a strategic purchase. So it was going to go to a kind of a competitor.
Yeah.
And the landlord now, the guy he's not in the business anymore. He sold this business 5, 6, 7 years ago, is trying to stop the transaction. He's not going to lease that facility to this new buyer because he doesn't want to he knows the competitor is going to get it at the end. And he's like, no, those guys aren't getting my business. I sold it to you.
Yeah,
Like,
it's a
you don't.
change of control issue. Like their change of control provision in the lease is not good because if it were good, it would say if you're selling substantially all the equity or the assets of the company, you don't
Yeah.
need your landlord's consent to do that.
He told me about the lease they use. It sounded more like a residential lease than it was anything. It was just basically a one pager. It said we pay for X number of dollars a month. Rent can be increased by a certain percentage I think it was every 3 years even, and we're responsible for all maintenance and repairs. It was basically like this guy had it drawn up on a single sheet of paper. I use a
Yeah.
longer one for my residential rentals. It
Leases
was
are
it
like
was
60 pages.
yeah.
You spend the money now, hire an advisor like us, hire
Mhm.
professional attorneys in real estate law, and you will not regret it 15 or 20 years from now. These are long agreements and people can be short-sighted, unfortunately.
This was a referral. When I told you people, I got a guy in my little campaign. This guy
Yeah.
reached out to me and says, "You know an attorney that can help me straighten this out because I'm going to probably have to bring an attorney in." I was like,
Yeah.
"Yeah, you're going to have to bring an attorney in." And theoretically, that if you did your paperwork right,
It wouldn't be an issue to begin with.
right, it wouldn't be an issue to deal with in the long term. But right now, an attorney is the only thing that's going to solve this, right?
Yeah, and they have
This,
no leverage. I mean,
right,
if the landlord doesn't want to approve it and I'm hopefully there's some reasonableness language in there and an attorney can get involved to get their hands dirty, but you don't want to be in that situation. You want to do
right,
it right the first time.
yeah. So I bring a deal to you. What's the timeline look like? What are we looking at? Like, what kind of lead time do you need to? And what's your lead time? Like, what is the time frame? And when in the deal? Like, I got an LOI. I know I want to close, and I think I'm going to need the money from the sales lease back to fund this transaction.
Yeah.
Kind of give me the timeline and where you fit in there. When should you be introduced to the whole transaction?
Well, sooner the better, always,
Hmm.
just regardless. I would say most of the time, the way the process really works is a sponsor or a searcher is looking at a business. They see that it has a real estate component. Pretty typically before LOI, they're sending us some high level information on the building, address, square footage, acreage, et cetera. Some high level financial information on the operating company, ideally 3 years of P&Ls, what their source and use is going to look like. And then we'll come back to them usually within a day or two with our sale leaseback proposal. That'll include our valuation, lease terms, proceeds, timeline, who the likely buyer universe is, et cetera. And then from there, we're usually just tracking the deal to see if they actually end up getting it signed up, if they end up moving forward. And then process wise, as soon as that acquirer has the business under exclusivity, that's when we would actually go out to our investors and start bringing in LOIs. And so, from a timing standpoint, you can do that at any point and but which you'd like. Obviously, having typically the sale leaseback valuation and the lease terms, knowing what that looks like usually can make you a more competitive bidder. Maybe you can pay more because there's some spread from the real estate, or maybe you can offer a holistic package for the seller by being able to take into account the sale leaseback. So most of the time, groups are coming to us early, like pre LOI, because the sale leaseback can impact what they're able to bid. So that's the first point. The second point, in terms of the actual transaction timeline, we've closed deals in as quick as 28 days. I would say that's very quick. We prefer to have something more like 60 days, 90 days would be great. it depends on the size of the deal. And it's sort of counterintuitive, but larger deals are actually easier to close than smaller deals, because larger deals, if they're institutional, we could go to the REITs, the funds, family offices, professional real estate investors, versus smaller deals. We're looking at private buyers, high net worth individuals, local people who just want to own property. And it's much more complicated to find them and then also to negotiate and close with them. So it depends on the timeline. It also depends on obviously what the acquirer's transaction timeline for the underlying business deal looks like. And we'll always work to fit into that.
Awesome. Define smaller deal and bigger deal in brackets.
I would say if we're like sub 3 million, you're probably looking at private buyer, local buyer type deal. Above that, typically that's when the institutions will get involved. It depends on the location though. For some better locations, better real estate markets, maybe we can go smaller on institutions because they have a preference for that market.
Right. And that's in real estate value.
Correct.
Okay. Just making sure everybody knows that. So the second question is, sometimes the real estate's worth more than, say, it's the seller's putting on it. You can get a premium through this sell
Yeah.
leaseback. What disclosures have to be done to the seller of the business if you're doing back-to-back close? Because I'm going to buy the business and then sell the real estate. Does the seller of the real estate in my residential real estate world, we call it an ABC close, a back-to-back close.
Yeah,
Or-
same
uh,
thing here.
yeah,
Double escrow. Yeah. So
I
no, you don't have to disclose anything to the seller. So the deals that we're doing, the seller thinks that the acquirer of the business is just buying the real estate. And obviously we're setting up that sale lease back to be just like you, ABBC, to be back to back, closing
mhm.
simultaneous with the acquisition of the operating company. The seller, the underlying seller, does not know about the sale lease back. They obviously know that the real estate is being traded, but they think it's ultimately being acquired by the business acquirer, who's then simultaneously selling it off. So they don't know about the spread in pricing. If the seller is selling the real estate to the acquirer of the business for 3 million, and then the acquirer of the business is selling it to the sale leaseback buyer at 5, the acquirer of the business is taking that, what did I say? So $2 million spread, and
Yep.
nobody knows on either side.
Does there need to be any type of capital reserve, any type of like money sitting somewhere? There's there money paid out front beforehand? Well, you mentioned early that somebody can bring you one early on in the stage. You guys charge for that service? Is that something you do for free? Or how does that work?
So everything that we do is 100% success based. So we're
Okay.
compensated when we close a deal. So we don't charge for anything upfront. There's no retainer. There's nothing like that. It's just a percentage of the total sale leaseback value, and that percentage will vary based on the size of the deal.
Okay. And then the reserves, there's not like too bad you guys don't do anything in like Switzerland or something. She probably already
No, we
done what you
do.
do.
We do.
Oh,
Yeah.
wow, wow.
Europe.
I'll reach out to her. I know
Yeah.
somebody. Here's a scenario for you. I know somebody was buying a furniture manufacturer and showroom and big multi-million dollar. I
Yeah.
think the real estate was probably 1.5 million to 2 million. It was a small deal on your scale for the real
Yeah.
estate. She was wanting to do a sales leaseback. She had people trying to help her do it. And basically, I don't know if it's just Switzerland law or something came into the play where the seller had to be aware, the business seller had to be aware of it. And she knew that was going to cause a deal because that real estate, while it had an emotional attachment to the original seller, so they built the
Yeah.
business on land that had been in the family for 150 years. They were selling it to her because they liked her. She didn't have an emotional attachment to the real estate itself. This family actually owned like one block of that town, like once over 150 years, and they had sold pieces off over time. But this is kind of one of the last pieces of the family legacy, and they just wanted to. There was an emotional tie to it,
Yeah.
so she didn't want to have the sellers be aware that she needed that money to give them their check to buy the business. She was part of her acquisition strategy. And I don't know the deal ever got. I won't say her name on here just because out of respect, I haven't asked her. But and people in my network will know if I say Switzerland Furniture and I say her name, they'll find her.
Right.
So I'll reach out to her and see if she still needs help with that.
I mean, like in terms of disclosure, that may be a local nuance. Obviously, we can look into it specifically, but
Yeah.
typically there's no disclosure. But the thing is, real estate sales are public. So if you
Right.
wanted to look into the records a couple months later, once the deed and everything is recorded and shows up in searches, the seller could. But most of the time, they've sold their business by then. A couple months later, they don't care. They're not looking in to see, oh,
Yeah.
did the acquirer make money above and beyond that price? We've
Yeah.
never had that come up. And we've done so many of these simultaneous deals where it was very sensitive that the seller didn't find out. So there must be just like some local nuance or something unique to the deal.
The one I know that successfully went through, the real estate was actually more valuable than the business.
Yeah, we've done a number of those deals.
Yeah.
That's like a lot of the time where the sponsor actually, we call it a sale leaseback free roll, where they're not putting in any equity to acquire the business. It's because of the real estate value being more than the business value. They can create spread above and beyond what the seller is looking for on the real estate side, and
Mhm.
then roll that spread into funding the acquisition of the
What
operations.
did you call that? Something free roll?
A sale leaseback free roll.
I'm gonna use that as a title. We're gonna how to do a sales leaseback free roll.
Yeah. I've literally written an article called like the art of the sale leaseback free roll.
The
We're
art of
trying to coin the term here.
we'll tag that as part of our title, the art of the sales
Perfect.
back free roll. That's a good one because a lot of these guys teach this. Like even the two, in full disclosure, I've taken courses from multiple people: Roland Fraser, Jeremy Harbour. I've studied on the show and got materials from all kinds of people that I've interviewed. They just gave me their materials after I've interviewed them,
Yeah.
and all of them say if you want to do a zero down, there's this deal pie, and one of them is sell the real estate, right? So it is a very viable solution. I'm glad I found you, and now we have
Yeah.
a team that can actually help do that. So I expect to do a lot of business with my I got a guy plan here, or I
Absolutely.
refer people to you and help them. That's one of the reasons I wanted to do the show. Like if I need to pre-screen people and kind of know what you're looking for, so I don't send things that waste your time. I'm a big thing on everybody's time is valuable. You're listening to my show, then people out there listening to my show, and you reach out to me. I'm gonna kind of do a little. I don't want to refer to you somebody that's just gonna waste your time, and I don't wanna refer you to somebody if it's not a good relationship situation. So, that's kind of where I stand on let's just make sure we can do our best. I can't control everything, but if I can make sure everybody's taken care of in this situation, then that's the kind of referrals I like to do. And if I make a few bucks on the back end, that's awesome, right?
Absolutely.
That's
We pay referral
yeah,
fees all the time. It's a big piece of our business, whether it's M&A firms,
yeah,
attorneys, lenders, even
yeah,
commercial bankers. We're deep in this space of middle market, lower middle market, SMB, and we want to
yeah,
reward everybody that's helping us get deals done.
yeah. That's cool. The funny thing is I've got a like I always joke and say I have a real estate buying addiction, but I don't wanna own the commercial. I like the residential side because of the appreciation. On the commercial side, I would be interested in, like, really high cash flow, but I never even thought about that. Like, if I bought a marina or something like that that had a really high cash flow, I never thought about, like, doing a sales leaseback on that and just keeping the cash flow and not actually having to be the owner of the land, right? I don't know if you'd be interested if your guys interested in, like, large marinas and
It comes down to the same criteria. We need to understand who's the guarantor, what do the financials look like, what do the site level economics look like. But yeah, we're actually looking at a marina deal right now.
oh, cool. So there's some high cash flow things like I always tell people I'm not interested in commercial real estate. And I guess kind of a lie. Marinas, high end RV parks, not low end ones, but high end RV parks for tiny home communities, things where there's kind
Yeah.
of luxury. Some of these RV parks actually have luxury, what they call condo units on the outside, where it's like they're fenced in and stuff. I don't know if I had even told you this. The studio I'm in right now is mobile. So
Oh,
the
really? No,
right
I did not know that.
this is a portable studio. It's actually made
That's
out of
awesome.
a Connex shipping container. So it's only
Wow.
10 foot by 10 foot. And our main house now, we sold our primary house in 5 acres in Oklahoma last year. Our main house now is a 320 square foot tiny home that we can pick up and take anywhere we want to go. So
Wow.
we're in that nomad lifestyle where we can pack up and go wherever we want in the world. So what we get to experience when we find a location until we find land to buy, we park at some of these RV parks and stuff. And some of them are high end, nice. Like there's only probably 20 units, 30 units in the one I'm in now. And I got redwood trees in my front yard. The owners are really cool. It's really laid back.
Totally different life from the life I live here in New York City. I
It's
also am in like 300 feet or so. No, I'm kidding.
funny thing is like you're in 300 jokingly, but you're in 500 to 1,000, 1,500 square feet or whatever the number is, and it's thousands per month. I paid cash for the tiny house. I paid cash for my office. I
Yeah.
think our living expenses insanely cheap. The lot rents for decent places here in California are under 1,500, maybe 1,800. Some of the more popular areas where there's like you're closer to town, and ours is significantly less than this, but it's really hard to get into this one. You got to catch a spot open and you have to like apply and like talk to the owners and stuff. It's a different situation because they're really looking. It used to be a really rough place. Actually, they cleaned it up, so they're really careful who they let back in.
Hmm.
So let's go back to how do people get a hold of you? I kind of want everybody to like work with me because we got a thing going. I think I'll just hang up my acquisitions and mergers hat and just go find deals for you. I like the real estate side. I think this is a brilliant way to do deals. Here's a good one before we wrap up. If
Yeah.
somebody's out there looking for deals to do, what's a good way to indicate that, hey, this could be a decent sales leaseback? And not just that they own real estate, but are there any other qualifying factors that you would look at it and go, hey, if you're out there looking and you want to do a zero down or low down or save your down payment for operating expenses and growth, here's kind of what you need to look for businesses that own real estate.
I mean,
You're a
honestly,
hot
it's
spot in the
really just
market.
like own real estate, and obviously the financials have to be there. It doesn't have
Mm,
to be a huge company. It depends on the deal, so it's hard to say because
mhm.
if it's a much smaller deal, the cash flows could be much smaller, but your coverage is still there. So I would say send us everything. We'll give you quick feedback on everything. I mean, everybody that's reached out through Twitter, I think for me, has gotten a response within 48 hours. So we're super responsive. If it's not a fit, we'll tell you quickly. We won't waste your time. We won't waste hours. But if it is a fit, it's pretty straightforward. The P&Ls that we need, the pro forma sources and uses, and then whatever you have on the real estate. But we have our own real estate database we can dig in as well.
Cool. So I always like to ask this real quick. If somebody could only remember 2 or 3 things from today's show, what would you have them to remember about sales leasebacks and about you in general?
Yeah, I mean, real estate included. Look at that as an opportunity for sale leasebacks. I say that all the time because I know in the M&A space that's a buzzword. It's a key word in a lot of these opportunities that groups are looking at, and a lot of acquirers are just shying away from those opportunities because they don't have a solution for the real estate. Let us be your solution for the real estate. And in terms of reaching out, you have my contact information. Again, we'll always give you quick feedback. We'll be very clear about the information that we need to see, and we'll tell you if it could be a fit or not.
Awesome, awesome. And to wrap this up, what's one thing you said you live in New York. So what's one thing about New York City that people don't know?
Ooh, that's a good question.
I've always wanted to go watch the ball drop, but I don't like big cities. I worked in San Francisco, and I don't for a long time there. Not a long time, a couple of years. I don't see the appeal of it. The whole town smells like pee. There's violence and crime everywhere. My wife goes down there for dinner and stuff with her sister. And like, you got to beg me to go. I won't go down there unless I have to. But
Yeah.
is New
We
York?
have the best food. I think, like, I just got off a couple-week trip in Europe and, like,
Mhm,
I loved it. Everything about Italy, the food was amazing, and Greece,
mhm.
but, like, we really have the better, like, cuisines of those countries here in New York City.
Cool. Well, I appreciate you being on the show today. I
Yeah.
look forward to doing a lot of work with you and sending you people. And I think this is an awesome show. I think we did a great job. I think people learned a lot from this one.
Yeah, well, thank you. It was great to be here, and yes, I am confident, 100% confident that we're gonna find ways to work together.
Awesome. We'll call that a show. Hang out for a few seconds. Hey, it's your host, Ronald Skelton. I want to thank you personally for watching the show today and invite you to call our new hotline, 918 641 4150. That's 918 641 4150. Call us and tell us about our show, ask questions, suggest a guest, or even tell me about a business you have for sale, and we'll reach back out to you. Again, that number is 918 641 4150. Call our hotline, leave us some information. Thank you. I want to announce our new channel partners, the ITX Marketplace. Since 1998, ITX has created $5 billion in value by selling more than 225 IT businesses in 20 countries. ITX works exclusively with IT-enabled businesses generating between 5 million and 30 million who are ready to be sold, and M&A decision makers who are ready to buy. For over 25 years, ITX has developed industry knowledge that helps determine whether a seller is a good fit for their buyers before making the match. ITX Mergers and Acquisition Marketplace we have partnered with has a proprietary database of 50,000 plus global buyers seeking IT service firms, managed service providers, Microsoft service providers, software as a service platforms, and channel partners with Microsoft, Oracle, ServiceNow, and the Salesforce space. If you have an IT enabled business you're ready to sell, I want you to visit the itexchangenet.com/marketplace. How to exit. That link will be in the show notes. Visit them now.